Hey everyone, and welcome to the Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek E. Silva. Today, joining me on the Private Podcast is Sanjay Rajashekar, the co-founder of SmartHub AI, which is a software-defined edge solution that simplifies your complex edge infrastructure and makes it way more intelligent. Now let's head over to the conversation with Sanjay Rajashekar. All right, and like I said off the top, we have Sanjay Rajashekar here on the private podcast today. Sanjay, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for having me today.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to where you are today as a co-founder of SmartHub AI?
Sure. So it's interesting how, as they say, serendipity comes back in full circle. So before we all came together to launch startup, I was the president for a company. It was an analytics company. We had products as well. And then I had dabbled with entrepreneurship. I had my own firm for a couple of years, and then used to work at Microsoft. Was an executive in a company called Telika, which was a Swedish firm, which became Symphony Telika. Then Harman ended up buying it. So have always been in the tech sector, and then dabbled with connected systems, embedded systems, mobility space. And then while I was the president at my last company, one of the co-founders, Niranjan, who's also our CEO, he used to head global R&D sites for VMware, and he was in the edge computing space, and edge computing was showing the promise. This was around 2.5, 3 years ago, and edge computing was fairly a new term, where people were wrapping around the rapid innovation that was happening on the hardware side and at the edge, far edge side in enterprises. So it was a very interesting space, and they had worked on a platform which was still in early beta stage with some of the top customers that VMware had. But also there was conversation and an opportunity for us to potentially look at it, grow it into a bigger company, specializing in IoT space, in edge infrastructure space. And that's when we started having conversations with VMware to say, can we spin it off as a separate company? And it was so attractive that a bunch of us all left what we were doing, got together, did a spin-off from VMware, and we were born as a company in August 2020, took the platform, developed a lot of AI capabilities on top of it and data management capabilities on top of it. And then came out of stealth in 2021, and late 2021 and 2022 has been phenomenally well for us as a company. And that's how SmartHub was born.
Good to hear. For maybe those who aren't very familiar with enterprise computing, especially or this space, can you give a bit of a definition of edge computing and even maybe particularly what that means to Smart Hub in terms of your focus?
Sure. So, edge computing goes by different terms. Edge computing predominantly is the broad category of computing that happens closer to where data is produced by the users as well as consumed by the users. What does that mean? Let's say you're manufacturing a plant, right, where all the sensors, all the machinery are producing huge amounts of data, sensing the environment, and that is being used to manage the operations at the manufacturing plant. If you take retail industry, Amazon retail, the go cashless kind of retail stores is a classic example where you walk into a stores, there's a huge number of computing that happens through cameras, through checkout, where you seamlessly go in, pick up a product that you want, and you walk out, and you then get a bill. How does that happen? How does that magic happen? That is because now you have hardware, you have capabilities, very low latency kind of computing available to you to do analytics, to do analysis, to do that sort of intelligence, which could traditionally be done only in the cloud, now that can be done locally, whether it's retail or manufacturing or building facilities. All the AI models, object identification, facial recognition, all those sort of compute are classic examples of enterprise edge compute.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, just to making sure everybody's on roughly the
Yeah,
same level as they're listening to
yeah,
this. Um, so I guess like that kind of leads into, I mean, we just heard, I guess this will tell people when we're recording this, just yesterday, Apple announced, even more computing being done on device. So like that's, I guess that's an example of being at the edge, right? So they have crash
correct.
detection now on device, on the watch or on the new iPhone 14.
Yes,
Um, and all the processing is as much as possible, at least being done locally, as opposed
correct,
to sending every single voice transcript to Apple's cloud, or Google doing the
correct.
same thing for when you're dealing with their assistant. Everything gets it's potentially everything could be processed in their cloud and then being sent back to you, which obviously adds latency. Whereas if you can do more and more on device because things are more powerful, or maybe you have new technology that allows you to reduce compute time in some other way besides adding more power, then you can do it more there and then just send the results back to the cloud, quote unquote, if
Correct.
needed for additional collection, warehousing, cross processing against other bits of data and that sort of thing.
Right. See, safety is a great example. Safety, fire. Let's say trains are going on the railway tracks and you need to identify object and take immediate action. Automotive is a good example where you can't keep sending it to the cloud. You need computing right there, intelligence right there, actions to be taken right there in microseconds and milliseconds rather than to wait for a couple of seconds or minutes for the computing to happen in the cloud and then come back to you, right? All those scenarios which require low latency, high computing, those are some of the things that are driving this whole adoption of edge computing. People talk about digital transformation. People want to try out different AI initiatives within their companies, and edge computing is the core part of how companies look at digital transformation today.
So yeah, because we've heard about things like vehicle to vehicle communication.
Hmm.
I think I was reading about that in Popular Science when out like 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago.
Yeah,
Obviously, we're still not there yet. So, there's definitely advancements still that need to be made. Can you talk a little bit more about Smart Hub's role in
sure.
this space? Like, what do enterprises come to Smart Hub to actually do, or to use your products and services for?
Got it. So if you look at how the enterprises have evolved, now when I say enterprises, let's define that clearly so that everyone understands. We are talking about industrial companies, high-tech companies, retail companies, any company which runs for business and which has a large global presence, has thousands of employees and office locations. These companies have figured out a way. There are technologies today to manage your IT managed assets, like your desktop, laptop. Any company, they'll manage it, monitor it, update, patch, secure it, right? They also manage your mobile device through MDM solutions. But what is happening is through various operations teams, a lot of IoT devices, also referred to as IoT endpoints, are coming into the enterprises. And most of our customers, they have anywhere from 4x to 5x number of IoT endpoints within their companies compared to the number of employees. That's huge. And largely, that infrastructure is unmanaged in a unified way, meaning there are many, many systems given by OEMs, in house, and it's a very fragmented space.
Right.
So now companies are saying, look, I own that infrastructure, but I don't know in a unified way. I don't have visibility. I don't have a way of monitoring it. I don't have a way of patching it. And more importantly, I don't have a way of getting that data which are currently in the siloed systems. So our platform manages one, the infrastructure around edge computing and edge endpoints. So through us, any device, any protocol, and on any operating system, because that environment is a very heterogeneous environment, and we are able to onboard that through the platform and then manage it in its entire life cycle, meaning we'll give them visibility, we'll give them performance of how those assets are doing, how those IoT devices and sensors are doing, the health of it. And then largely this infrastructure is not patched on a regular basis. And today, if you see, there's a lot of cybersecurity attacks happening through IoT devices in enterprises. And you need to be able to patch, you need to be able to secure it, you need to be able to detect anomalies if something changes in that environment. All those sort of intelligent ways of managing that complex infrastructure is what SmartHub does. And then we get also that data from that edge environment, and we mesh it up and then draw meaningful insights and predictive analytics, and we run a lot of AI ML models which allows people to learn, companies to learn how their edge environment is doing and what they can do better, especially from an operations perspective.
Yeah, that's actually I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, like SmartHub AI. So obviously
Hmm.
there's some machine learning and
Yeah.
maybe artificial general intelligence or something like that coming at some point. Like what? So are you purely analyzing the devices themselves, looking for security? Like, is this more of like a traditional Norton or McAfee type thing where you're looking for security vulnerabilities? Is this like what sort of things can your ML models and the AI that comes from that like actually tell an enterprise about their leak sensors or noise sensors or all these IoT devices that they have out there?
Yeah. So we follow pretty much what you might have heard of zero trust kind of paradigm in computing, where essentially you're like you want to create segments, you want to be able to uh, not trust anything until the right credentials is provided and mechanisms and checks and balances happen. So we take that same zero trust approach to one, the edge devices themselves. So let us say we have some of the top hyperscalers as our customers, and they have literally hundreds of thousands of IoT sensors and devices in their buildings
Wow.
and in their facilities. So we monitor that in real time. What do we monitor, right? We monitor, apart from the performance and the health of those devices, we also monitor things like, did a configuration change? One of the best ways in finding out whether a hack happened was if people go change the URL or MAC address or some strange behavior happens. So we do detect anomalies at the in almost close to real time that has happened on any of these devices. And we have very complex layers of security built in, whether it's certificate management, different ways of onboarding, authenticating those devices, password rotation, what is also called as a configuration drift. We immediately alert the key people and notify them that, hey, these are the configurations that changed on these devices. Are they valid, right? So one is trapping, detecting the activity in real time that happens at the edge. Then we also run different ML models to create our own vulnerability risk and assessment scores. So for example, a camera on a manufacturing floor, which is monitoring certain things, is far more valuable than a camera, let's say, in a corridor where nobody walks or in a parking lot, right? Not all devices
Right.
are equal. So we are able to figure out which ones are more important, which ones have higher score from a business perspective, monitor it, and gives vulnerability scores, which essentially means these are the top 10 that you need to address right now.
Okay.
That is on the vulnerability. What we also do, when that's where most of the AI ML comes in, is we suck in a lot of data, historical data, as well as telemetry data from the edge. And that is where we apply a lot of ML models to learn behaviors, to learn patterns, correlations, and then feedback that into an action loop. So in a manufacturing plant, what are the 10 different variables you can adjust to get optimized uh, product or optimized output, right? Those can be learned. Previously, we had to do it manually as humans. Now you can take huge amounts of data sets, apply ML against it, and learn what the correlations are. And then we do all sorts of learning in the cloud, and some of them we also push it back to the edge. So a good
Okay.
example is during the COVID, you had different sort of rules where some of the rooms, some of the facilities could only occupy at 50%. Then you could occupy only 20%, 25% of the capacity, then 50%, then back to normal.
Right. Right.
That's what is called as a dynamic threshold. It keeps changing over a period of time. Those are things that where we can learn and push it out so that the behavior at the edge on what is alerted, what is monitored, all of that changes in real time as
Hmm.
well. That is where
Oh,
the
interesting.
intelligence comes in.
So you said we suck up all this data. How is this actually deployed? Is this on-prem software and hardware? Is this all cloud-based? So like SmartHub has infrastructure where all this data is going back to, and you're processing it, and like you said, giving reports or sending data back. Like how does this actually get rolled out to an Amazon type customer where obviously they have warehouses all over the world and bots
Correct.
and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, good question, because we are flexible. We are one of the few companies which have a very flexible architecture. We can run it on a cloud, we can run it on-prem. Certain countries don't want the data to get out of their country. Certain companies
Right.
don't want the data to get out of their premises, let alone the country.
Yeah.
So in which case on-prem kicks in. We see majority of them looking at a hybrid model, especially if low latency is required, where, for example, the analytics part, actions part, alerting part, we do it on-prem on small edge compute boxes um, from a low latency standpoint, and all the rest we do it in the cloud.
Okay.
Most of them will say, look, it is not critical, like facilities management, right? They will say it is not super critical that it has to be done in few seconds. I can wait a minute or so to be alerted, in which case we do everything in as a SaaS in the cloud environment.
Um, I know enough, or like I'm a trained IT professional, so back in the day, or even still now, like when it comes to a desktop, a laptop, you mentioned mobile device management earlier, you still need agents, right? You still need some sort of small piece of software installed on the laptop or the desktop or the phone. Do you actually have agents getting rolled out, or are you almost entirely just analyzing the data and looking for, the ML models are looking for patterns and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because people in this space kind of understand how to monitor. Our preference is we have both agent as well as agentless ways of deploying it. Our preference is agent based, and it's a very small footprint, 6 MB, 8 MB kind of agent. Why do
Yeah.
we prefer an agent? Agent allows us to sit on an edge compute box, whether it's a gateway or whether it's a device, and control it in a much more meaningful way. Otherwise, we are dependent purely on the APIs that they expose and things like that.
Right.
And then there is richer capabilities, richer things that can be done if it's an agent-based deployment. So in some cases, we can't land anywhere, in which case we look at agentless ways of monitoring that device, talking to that environment and getting data out. But
Okay.
the flexibility in our SDKs and how we land and collect that data and integrate with those complex hardware and IoT sensors and endpoints, that's what makes us very unique. And we also have reduced the whole several months of deployment, typically done in such scenarios, to few days. We can provision, if let's say you have a set of devices for which we have integrations and libraries, we call them the adapters. We can start provisioning you in day zero. We open up an SaaS account, and then we can onboard your devices on that same day, and you will start seeing telemetry data and management capabilities.
Cool. What do you find most of your clients are actually doing with this data? Like, maybe you don't have to name any, obviously, but if you have a retail client or a manufacturing client, whether that's gleaned something super important, maybe it's something that was completely invisible to them before. I think that'd be really, really interesting. But what sort of wins are your clients seeing from rolling this type of technology out?
Yeah. So the first benefit is that they are able to manage this infrastructure, get visibility. If let's say a CISO or a CIO asks them, hey, how many devices are hanging off my network? How many of them have been patched? How many of them are being monitored? Most of them will
Yeah,
get Excel sheets or blanks, or it's like, oh, I have a rough idea that we have 5,000 devices, let's say. And then we
give or take,
do a discovery,
give or
and then
take a few
suddenly we will
hundred.
find, correct, correct. Or, right. So one is that entire management of that infrastructure. Obviously, you specifically asked around the data. What people do from that edge data is essentially focus more about gaining insights that offers them intelligent experiences. So I'll give you an example. There are some of the top hyperscalers that I mentioned, which look at it from a facility standpoint. As people come back into the offices, how can the facilities be seamless? There is a hybrid kind of workplace now. People come in, people go out. They're not, the traditional ways of working in an office is kind of gone. Right? People come in for 2 3 days. They might go to the local close by office rather to the office that I'm allocated at the headquarters. In which case, how should the facilities respond to my needs, know who I am, and provision all the services around me? That's the
Yeah,
intelligent ways of providing experience to me as an employee, right? Who is using the facilities. That's one part. If you look at manufacturing as a company, now most of them have invested in some sort of an IoT, they have plans. COVID kind of highlighted the labor problems, the supply chain problems. They still want the operations to run. So for them, they use this data to, one, figure out what is up, what is down, because they have limited resources. They need to be able to allocate those resources to go fix things quickly so
right.
that their operations are not impacted. But a lot of them are using the platform for what we call as the AI ops, which is AI operations, where they're taking humongous amounts of data coming in from their edge environment and using our platform to gain insights to say what should be the optimal setting, what should be the optimal ways of saving energy, what should be the optimal ways of using certain machinery. And then predictive analytics, of course, you would have heard that many companies talk about predictive analytics. We see
Yeah,
companies use that. Is it showing signs of failing, right? I'll give you an example. In one of the high-tech companies, they have extremely complex conference room infrastructure. Each conference room has 8 to 10 IoT devices. There is
wow.
certain set of devices from a certain manufacturer where if the memory goes above threshold, it kind of stops working. Someone has to physically go there, reboot it, and manage it. So that we do automatic remote diagnostic sweeps and remediation as well.
Okay,
So that somewhere automation kicks in and heals it, monitors it, and things like that. That's where they use the data to get patterns and learn and then take actions.
that's pretty cool. I'm just from my own past. I'm envisioning like a Polycom conference phone or something like that,
I
or
didn't
an
say the
Epson
name.
projector. No, no, that's fine. I'm saying I'm imagining it, just from,
Yeah.
or somebody's really old Nortel stuff that should have been replaced by now.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just envisioning like for my own past of like, oh yes, a BenQ projector would totally do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
Correct.
maybe not anymore because I haven't toyed around with those sorts of things in earnest and day in day out for a long time. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not trying to throw BenQ, Epson, Polycom, etc. under the bus. I could there's lots of other devices where that could be too. It could be
Yeah.
happening, but
Yeah.
that those are the sorts of things that came to mind. Um, Okay, so that's that's all really cool. From an IT like a system administrator or network administrator's perspective, this all sounds like a dream come true. Like, oh my God, I finally have visibility to all this stuff. Why is it so hard to secure IoT devices, generally speaking?
Good question. Because traditionally, you have to look at the motivation of the manufacturers when they launched these sort of devices and solutions around it. For them, they were solving certain use case, whether it's a vertical or whether even if it's horizontal, certain use case which solves a business problem. And they came up with software stack to support it, manage their set of devices. But such use cases are compounding in an enterprise, right? And there is no motivation for them to support heterogeneous play, open standards,
Right.
because all of them, let's take the big guys, the Honeywells, the GEs, all of these big companies have done a phenomenal job of offering solutions and hardware around the space that they are in. But enterprises are now struggling to say, I have many such use cases. I need a platform which can cut across those and at least help me manage, secure them. So the heterogeneity and the complexity involved in managing others, that is something that people didn't think about in the industry, or even if they thought about it, they're like, hey, it's not my problem. I want to solve this problem. That's
Yeah.
where solutions and platforms like us come into place. It was the same thing if you look at it, it's just history repeating itself. When early laptops, desktops came, it was extremely siloed. Even getting drivers for your accessories and peripherals was a pain.
Yeah.
And then as an industry, we all moved towards certain open standards, and that's when things became easy. That hasn't matured yet in the IoT. And while that is not addressed, we will continue having these silos.
That's okay. Web3 is going through the same thing too. we 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 always seem doomed to repeat some of the worst mistakes, especially in technology. Um, as we move forward, it's like Apple Talk. Like that was Apple's proprietary networking protocol for a long time, and finally everybody standardized on TCP/IP and things like that. But even like 10 years ago, they were still pushing Bonjour for like interacting with printers and things like that. Like, just
Correct.
can we just use IP? Like, can we just use TCP/IP even internally? Like, this stuff works. I don't
Correct.
understand why everybody needs to push their own thing. We can't have 20 standards. That means there's no standard.
Correct.
um, like actually, speaking of standards, like does SmartHub, since you guys get it, since your team gets exposed to so many different quote unquote standards, like do you advocate at all for manufacturers like Belkin and Belkin's probably a bad idea or a bad example because that's really a home based one. But like bringing this home for people like Linksys, Belkin, Eero, right? Like they could all do their own proprietary thing if they wanted to. But obviously, we end up in a ridiculous situation. And so finally, on the home front, at least, and maybe a small business, well, we have Matter coming along for all these IoT devices so that your HomePod Mini can actually talk to your what's the Google one? Your Google Nest. Like you could actually do cross border, cross platform things really really quick easily. Is there anything like that happening on the enterprise side? And are is Smart Hub pushing for maybe consolidation down to a couple of standards that you see in your work really well?
Yeah, we do, but we are still small to move the needle. So what we do is we work
Sure.
through our customers. Fortunately, we have big logos as our customers, and we work through them in putting the pressure on the OEMs. But typically, what we advocate at least is, look, there are reasons why you chose a certain protocol or a certain way of doing things. That's fine, but at least expose them through APIs, right? For interoperability, for integration. And most of them don't seem to have a problem with that. We say create some sort of an architecture, because the interoperability is coming. You will have systems talking to each other and wanting to be managed and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
There are companies which are adopting that and are quite well aware that they need to support this. There are still some who will take a stance of, no, this is proprietary, we want to manage ours. Uh, who are you to tell us what to do? We have that situation too, in which case we go through the customers, and the customers say, hey, great, you don't have APIs, you don't have ways of talking, but I need it. If you want to be selling your devices in my environment, I want that
Right.
interoperability and extensibility. And
Yeah.
then they listen to that and open it up. So it is still a struggle. We anticipate maybe 5 years, 4 years, whatever it is. We can be optimistic. The bigger, the faster, like the Amazon, the Microsofts of the world push towards some standards along with industry bodies, better it is. But this problem has been in the market since quite a while, just because of the
Yeah.
sheer number of manufacturers. I mean,
Yeah.
no other space has as many hardware manufacturers as IoT space.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, correct.
So we talked about scale. We talked about lack of access sometimes. Incredibly heterogeneous environments because everybody specializes in their own thing. Are there any other major challenges that your customers in this industry are having right now, and but maybe you see being solved over the next couple of years?
Yeah, from a trend perspective, there are a couple of things that we see, right? One is this whole enterprises wanting to manage the assets that they own.
Hmm.
So there is that awareness growing fast from a CIO, CSO, CISO level to saying, hey, I want to secure this edge environment. I want to tap this edge infrastructure. I want to make sure that it's up and running, and I want to tap it for the data. So that trend, what we are focused on, that is
Yeah.
there. But also there is interesting phenomena that we see from a trend perspective. We see legislation come into play. Last year, the White House released the memo on cybersecurity, and for the first time, they're talking about how companies supplying to the Fed government should have their IoT infrastructure secure and managed, and
Imagine that.
because it's become a matter of national security now, because all these cameras and other things were meant from a consumer standpoint, very easy to deploy,
Hmm.
um, and very easy to hack and get into as well. So legislation is pushing in.
Easy to
This
deploy, hard to manage.
hard to manage. Yeah, correct. So legislation is kicking in quite a lot, and then you have the whole connectivity and computing becoming cheaper and cheaper. The whole 5G has been talked about, but now you see devices coming with 5G connectivity, and that makes it very easy. I don't have to hop on to the whole network, Wi-Fi network, and whatever
Right.
other networks are available. The device can directly talk to the cloud and send its telemetry data. So connectivity, hardware, you will be surprised with what sort of edge compute servers are available at what price points. Pretty much like a laptop kind of. In fact, some of the Macs are more expensive than some of these edge compute boxes.
I'm,
And
I'm sure the Macs are more expensive. They're always more
yeah,
expensive.
yeah. And
As I speak here from my MacBook Pro.
correct. I'm running that same thing as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So I can put as many edge compute servers or boxes in let's say my local retail store, and run a lot of analytics on top of it right there. So that is driving adoption. So we see similar trends in the next 1 to 3 years horizon. And a lot of companies are already thinking ahead of how do I embrace it? How do I increase? There's only certain amount of operational efficiency that can be gained with the way they're doing things today. That is where people are looking at AI, ML to say what else, right? How can we push the frontier? How can we get more out of what we have? And that's where the edge computing is going to get more and more interesting, more and more attractive to companies.
Um, Not trying to throw any cold water on this. I'm just, the question that came to mind. Is there
Hmm.
any concern, even maybe just from the CI, from the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, or maybe even from the employees at the edge, being on camera, stuff like that? You mentioned, being able to check thresholds of like, is this room at 25% capacity, 50% capacity, etc. Is there any concern about the security of that data itself? Like, if it's on prem, your customer needs to take care of it, and and that'll be subject to their security practices that they hopefully already have in place. But any of that data that you are hoovering up, as you mentioned earlier, like, it's what do your clients have any concerns about that, and how are you treating that data?
Yeah, most of them don't, because the type of data, it is not PII specific data per se. It is more of operations, right? And it's more of non-critical personal data. We create instances. Some companies will say, I have my own hosting environment, which
Yeah.
I rely on, which I know it is secure. Can you run it off of that hosting service? And we do that. We support Azure, AWS, we support Oracle Cloud, bunch of different cloud environments. They will see that. They'll also look at the type of the data that we collect. Most of it is telemetry, operations, how the devices are doing. It is not credit cards, personal information, any of those more sensitive data that they are currently worried about. So we haven't seen any customer, and we are ISO 27001 certified company. So we have checks and balances for data redundancy, security, all of those things in place. Otherwise, we can't get into the kind of enterprise companies that we have today as customers. Some of them are like 200 questions of InfoSec policies and procedures that we have to go through. And that is where coming out of VMware helped, because this was built at the enterprise with an enterprise in mind.
Right.
So we know what it takes to address some of their concerns.
Yeah, I've written one of those security checklists before as a template for small and medium-sized businesses. So for anybody
Yeah,
who's had to go through it, sorry about that.
it's painful. Yeah.
Which is, before we spoke, I thought, like, I looked at yours and your co-founder Niranjan's LinkedIn's, and I'm like, I must have came across these guys at some point, because I worked at
Yeah.
Infotech Research Group. I went to Stanford for the Open Networking Forum, the first ever Open Networking Forum about software-defined networking. You guys call yourself the software-defined edge, or use
Yeah.
that term. Like, I must have met these guys at some point. Maybe not, but
We would have
there's always a
met at least
chance.
when I was at Microsoft. Niranjan was at VMware, and then before that, RSA.
Yeah,
So
if not you,
before
somebody you worked with for
somebody,
sure.
yeah. I think
um,
before COVID, we were all pretty active in conferences and speaking sessions and other things.
yeah,
But COVID brought a completely different perspective.
sure. Well, I'm talking like 10 years ago now,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Then
it's
we were all active in the market.
yeah, exactly. Do you have any thoughts on Web3, blockchains, cryptocurrencies, how they may impact smart hubs operations at some point, or your clients, if they're starting to talk about that topic at all?
Yeah, Web3, interesting that you ask. We still see it a ways out, but the angle that we are looking at it, which seems attractive and more feasible, is especially the blockchain kind of capabilities, because some of the edge environment, there is critical need of auditing, because auditing plays a big role, and that is where your blockchain ledger, for example, comes into place, where we don't want to log each and every activity, but big changes that happen which led to vulnerability, or someone changing something that they're not supposed to change. How do you raise
Right.
that alert, put it in a blockchain, and you know for sure that it's forever not tampered? Things like those are spaces that we are closely watching from a Web3 perspective. But for us, it is not something that a customer has said, I need to integrate it right now. But it will come. It will come in the next 1 year, 2 years, especially manufacturing, retail, any vertical which says, I want to know whether a critical event or a vulnerability or something happened, which I need to track from a liability perspective, and which I
Right.
need to put it in a blockchain ledger so that it's not tampered later on.
Yeah.
That
That's
sort
what
of
I was thinking.
audit
Like
capability.
it's one thing to put it like if you have an incredibly sophisticated attacker, and they know you're using Microsoft SQL Server 2018 or whatever, to store that data, they could potentially have somebody ready to update the database records to show there's no alert, everything's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
um, and so, yeah, if it actually went into a blockchain ledger of some kind, whether it's Corda, a private Ethereum, based network or what have you, yeah, then it's there. And unless they take over all the other validators, that are or miners or whatever that are running that network, and at the time and overwrite that, which is a whole other kettle of fish to try and take that over. Yeah, you would have
Any vertical like
a
oil and
fairly
gas,
reliable.
yeah,
Yeah.
any vertical like oil and gas or anything where the liabilities are huge for violations, that is where we are going to see the push for the space that we are in from a Web 3 perspective.
Cool. What about through Q4 into 2023? What is Smart Hub working on that you can share with us? Like, where are you guys headed next?
Um, of course, more and more larger footprint of customers that we can help. That's the obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what we have taken an approach is once the customers have started using our platform and technologies, there's a lot of innovative ideas that come up where they want us to incorporate that in the roadmap and things like that. Especially around intelligent actions that could be automated, workflows that could be automated, learning models that could be learned and then incorporated for their verticals. All those are some of the things that we are working on from a product perspective. From a
Yeah.
go-to-market perspective, from a sales and marketing perspective, of course, expanded footprint in different places and different verticals is something that is top of our mind for Q4 and next year. And just delivering
Excellent.
on the key wins that we have, because all these are innovative companies, and I'm sure they'll keep pushing us to innovate more and more into the product as well.
Yeah. And then you can keep advocating for them to push their other vendors for better standards or to use standards or to open up the access to the data to
Correct.
through a REST API or whatever you guys are working with. Um, Final question, unless something else comes up. Um, how do you see machine learning and AI continuing to impact software development or starting to impact software development in industries where it's not hitting right now?
Interesting question. So
Thank you.
I think more than AI, some of the companies, retail, automotive, all of those understand the value. For industries which don't understand that, it's not specifically AI perspective, but we at least see ML helping them, where it might not be directly consumed by the customer, but companies which address that space, those laggard verticals where there is data today, but not much has been done with that data. Tech companies are looking at verticals like those to say, how can we tap that rich data where inferences haven't been done, insights haven't been developed yet? What can I address as a solution and a service there? I think that's where ML will be the first to actually tap into the existing data. And then we anticipate, people call it digital transformation. Some companies will say AI initiative and things like that. But that sort of being able to do a little bit more than what humanly was possible using technology, using machine learning, I think that is going to trickle to every vertical in the space, where it's just a matter of time. There are some which are way ahead. There are some which are not, but those will come. Like things like agriculture, for example. Agriculture is going through a big boom. Smart agriculture, smart orchards. We are doing something in Philippines with Dell for one of the largest campuses there. Um, Smart agriculture has one of the highest growth rate in which how IoT can enable them have more optimal production,
Right.
monitor the soil humidity, all of those sort of disease control. So it is coming there as well. They won't call it as an AI per se, but using the technology to do what they are doing, tapping into the data that they have to get more understanding, that is where it's we see ML trickling in.
Yeah, I can definitely see being able to increase yields there, whether you're like you said, measuring soil dryness, soil nutrients, the fruits and vegetables themselves, monitoring for pests,
Yeah.
potentially being able to use less fertilizer or less pesticide and that sort of thing against them, and in the end, I guess reducing costs, increasing yields and quality. Yeah, it's a win-win situation, assuming that all goes well.
Yeah, it may not come from the farmer side, but look, the food problem
Right.
is something that we are battling with as one of the biggest macro trends in the world, right? Food, environment, pollution, things like those, sustainability, all your ESG goals.
Yeah.
And food is one of them. So companies are looking at new ways of producing more from a food perspective. Those are the ones who will bring this technology to the farmers level because they are productionizing it, the whole farming vertical.
Yeah. Like I guess taking, vertical farm technology and potentially spreading it out to more traditional farms or industrial size, but in a good way. Because I know industrial size farming, it has its problems, no doubt.
Everything is, yeah.
Yeah, everything has its problems for sure. Cool. Sanjay, I think that was great insight. Thank you very much for your time. If people want to keep up with what you're doing, what you're working on, and SmartHub, where should they visit online?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on SmartHub.ai, or even happy to share my email address. Happy to take their questions, talk to them as well.
No hot takes on Twitter?
I'm not much of a Twitter guy. We are still
That's
trying
fine.
to uh, learn that whole thing, but that's where our marketing team will come into picture. I'm not much
Good.
active on Twitter. They keep saying
That's
I need
fine.
to go on Twitter, but I'm old
I,
school
I
that
think
way.
LinkedIn is the right spot for you. No worries.
LinkedIn or email. Emails also
Yeah.
work.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much again for your time, and for everybody listening or watching. Until next time, stay free.